This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and the slides. I'll tell you more about myself in a moment, but I'm Mike Lasecki, and I'm your host and presenter today. Our topic, how to mine job listings to parse employers' need. Before I tell you a little bit about the CCTA, let me remind you that today we're using the Cisco WebEx system. This is a new system to us as we move forward into this academic year, so please have a little patience with us as we bring up the polls and manage the Q&A and, in general, handle that system, so thank you. The CCTA is led by 5 centers. You can see them here on the right: the National Center for Convergence Technology, the SCATE Center in South Carolina, the FLATE Center in Florida, BioLink out in San Francisco, and the Networks Resource Center at the Maricopa Community College District in Phoenix. You know, the purpose of the CCTA is to provide technical assistance not only to Department of Labor TAC grantees and NSF grantees, but really to workforce-oriented programs of all kinds. We do have deliverables. One of them is this webinar series. You're listening to one of our deliverables today. In some of the webinars, we feature 1 week later a live recording with attendee Q&A afterwards so that we can do that live, give you another chance to ask questions. If you look at the CCTA website, you'll see a number of white papers on best practices, and we host convenings at national events. Now that I've told you a little bit about that, let's start by asking you a question in the first poll. So Christina, could you launch that poll for us? Folks, what you'll see in just a moment on the upper right, there it is, on the upper right of your screen, the polling button. In the middle of your screen, it says, what is your affiliation? So go ahead and click on which ones that you have. We'll give you just a minute. You probably know the answer here. And we'll ask Christina to show those in just a minute. So please tell us if you're involved with NSF, TACT, both, or neither. Christina, I'm going to give them a few seconds. I'll count down, and then let's take a look at the results. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go ahead and close that poll. Oops, don't forget to submit your responses. I forgot to submit there. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the results. So just a second, folks, hope you take a look at this. Oh, there's the results. Thanks you very much, Christina. So here's the results that we're seeing on the screen, and you can see them too for yourself. The majority of the people are not involved with either of these grants. That's interesting. And a fair number of us involved with the NSF, some TACT, a few both. Well, that's interesting. So let's go forward. Let's close that poll, Christina, and I'm going to advance to the next one. Now, for purposes of demonstrating our impact on this next poll, you'll come up there in just a second. How many people are listening with you? I know sometimes in our work group, we'll sit around the table, project on the screen, and listen together. So is it none, just yourself, of course, or one other person, or 3 or more? Go ahead and submit your answers. Don't forget to click, like I did, on the lower right where it says submit. Well, we pretty much know this answer right away. So Christina, let's give them 3 seconds, and then we'll close the poll. 3, 2, 1. Poll is closed, and let's take a look at the results. And then we'll get started with our webinar. So thank you for participating in these polls today. It takes just a moment to bring up the results here. Okay, well, thanks. While Christina's pulling those up, I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide, and we'll get started here today. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've had the privilege of being a principal investigator and reviewer for both the NSF, the Department of Ed, and NIH since 1989. And in my background, there's a bunch of stuff, but in particular, workforce development from my time at a large community college district here in Arizona. Today, my business, Luca Partners, is focused on evaluation and assessment. And I'm also fascinated in making connections with industry, making community college connections with industry. And really, that's part of the prompting for this webinar today. So here's our topic: how to mine job listings to parse employers' need. I'm going to do this a little bit differently today. I'm going to tell you a story, the story of my attempts to understand this. That sounds rather grandiose, doesn't it? But I'd like to give you a bit of the story here so you can see what's knowable, what you can find out here within the limits of what we have. What can we know? So that's the idea. But now let me acknowledge my colleagues who helped me prepare this. John Catapano, he's in the workforce development at the Maricopa Community Colleges. He does a lot of data analysis there of these type of things. John Carice, California Centers for Excellence, is just a real leader in California about looking at data. He works there with his colleagues. I had an opportunity to talk to Dan Rastasia at Burning Glass Technologies. They're located in Boston. I'll tell you about that conversation. Mark Lashinsky, he's the head of our industry advisory board here in Phoenix. He works at a really cool company called Modern Industries, really high-end advanced manufacturing company. And my colleague Leah Palmer at Mesa Community Colleges really puts on her thinking cap when she thinks about demand and dealing with industry. So I appreciated conversations with all of these folks as we prepared for this story. So what's the point of view today? Well, out there listening are PIs, grant developers, workforce development personnel, faculty. That's who this is for, but it's probably not for the people who day-to-day use things like Burning Glass Technologies. They know much more about this than all of us, so it's not really targeted for them. It's targeted for us who don't know as much, at least at this point. Here's what we're going to do today. Remember, it's a story. We're going to paint a picture of the need and rationale for doing this. Why are we doing this? And we might briefly talk about, well, how do we do it now? How does curriculum keep pace now? We talk about the methodology that's used, like looking to the demand side. Remember, in our educational world, we're the supply side. The demand side is the industry side. I'd like to discuss what is knowable at the middle of the page there and what are the limitations. And I know this is somewhat of a strong statement, but how can this fundamentally, you could get out your pencils and underline the word fundamentally. How does it fundamentally change your relationship with industry? So let's start with the rationale for why we're doing this. Well, here's one of them. It's about jobs, and jobs support our gainful employment data. Now, many of you know what this means. The Department of Education has created a ruling or legislation, I'm not sure what it is, but every program at a public and private community colleges is required, and it's turning on now, to give essentially consumer information to students about what the cost will be of the program, what their prospects are for jobs, what they might make in those jobs. So a lot of colleges are struggling with this because they're under the gun to continue giving financial aid for students. They've got to be able to show this data. I just went to one of our colleges, Mesa Community College, and they're starting to put this up. They don't even have a lot of the data yet, but you can see students graduating on time, program cross. There's other things there. But at the heart of some of this gainful employment information are jobs. Are students getting jobs? That's the critical thing. And I think that's where today is going to take us, how to deepen that relationship with employers. I was talking with my colleague Leah Palmer. I mentioned her originally, and I said, how do you connect industry with your talent pipeline? And she said, we struggle with this. Mike, she said, look at this data. She got this from the Manufacturing Institute, a report that they did. So look on the right-hand side, and what we see here is the top sources of employees. This is a survey done by companies. So look what's circled there in the middle. Community colleges, they're pretty far down on the list, aren't they, in terms of where their top sources of employees are. So we'd like to push that up higher. Let's look at this one. The employers were then said, what's your preferred strategy for finding employees? There it is, number 2, involvement with local schools and community colleges. So it's funny, right? Number 6 is where they actually find employees, and number 2, that's us, is where they prefer them. So again, you're hearing a rationale here of why we should be looking to deepen this connection with industry. It sometimes seems, my God, the fields change overnight. In terms of skills, now all of a sudden they're looking for skills in some special type of data analytics or things like that. It seems to change very quickly. How can we keep up? Well, this isn't an old question for educators. How do we keep pace? Well, historically, I just found this sort of thing. I think we rely on our curriculum process. People are sort of smiling about that because we know that this wheel takes a long time to go around, right? We develop, we approve, we communicate, we evaluate, we assess. And of course, we rely on our industry connections, but I'm not sure exactly what that means. What do? Call our industry friend and ask them to review our curriculum? Sometimes we do. But historically, that's been our process. And again, that timeline, all of us know this, is long. I'd like to change that a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. Actually, I'm going to ask you 3 rhetorical questions. You don't have to answer this in the Q&A unless you want to. It says in the white text there, a little bit hard to read, how many of us swear our programs are tightly aligned to industry's needs? I see the hands going up. A lot of us swear that. At least people I talked to said, oh yeah, we're really aligned to industry needs. So just think about that for a moment. Answer that question in your mind. Here's the second rhetorical question. How many of us had written a proposal or been part of writing a proposal in that need and rationale section, right? It's always up there in the front where you're demonstrating the need and demonstrating the rationale, claiming we need to more closely align our programs to industry needs. Hands are going up all over the room. A lot of us do this. In fact, that's sort of a standard rationale. We need to better align to industry needs. We write that all the time. Third rhetorical question. When our industry advisory board meets, do we sometimes struggle when it comes to talking about needed skills? Look, here's the reality, right? Sometimes an advisory board, we're largely telling them what we're doing and hoping to get some reaction. It's not always true. We'll talk a little bit about our business and industry leadership teams later on, where we're trying to increase that conversation and, in fact, have industry lead that conversation. But it is a problem, right? All of us, many of us, have been involved in these boards, these advisory councils, whatever you want to call them. So how do you talk with those people? What's the conversation? So those are the 3 rhetorical questions that I'm making you think about. Oh, I just looked at a question that came into the window. The question says, Mike, can you stop telling us the rationale and just get on with what you're going to do here today? I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. That's my reminder to stop talking about the rationale and get to the meat of today's story. Here I am asking myself questions. That's good. Let's look at the demand side. Remember I mentioned the demand side in the very beginning of the webinar. Well, how do you do that? You look at data from a place like Burning Glass Technologies and others. There are other names too. And you're going to use that data to look at job postings, current job postings. Now, this is not new. This has been done for a while now. I don't mean to say like it's just happening. But boy, the tools have really increased in their viability to do this. So what are you going to do with that data? You're going to analyze it. You're going to look at, number 1, who are the top employers? Because that's important to know. Number 2, what are the top skills and are they looking for specific certifications? Number 3, what are the educational requirements? And this one might not seem so obvious, but what are the job titles? Many of you would recognize that knowing the job titles is important because that helps you identify the demand if you know the breadth of titles. That's always an issue for our programs. I bet you it is for yours as well. So think, we're turning our eyes to the demand side. I want to put out, we're not talking about workforce demand. We're not talking about number of jobs. Look, that's important, I get it, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to talk more about the skill side. I'm just throwing that out there. How does it work? Well, you use a data miner. They don't like to call themselves data miners. Burning Glass Technology would like to be referred to as a software analytics company. Well, that means they're data miners. But that's fine because today there's a huge amount of information can be gotten from theirs. There's others. Many of you might know them, EMSI, something called Wanted Analytics, which was just bought out recently by somebody else. So there are others out there. Burning Glass, these are the one I know about, so we might talk about that today. So this is how it works. You start with them. What is Burning Glass, by the way? Well, I took this from their website, so it must be true, right? It's an interactive report generating application that gives users a real-time access to a comprehensive database of demand, that is, jobs data. That seems pretty good. Look at the italics where this is what they like to say: intelligence on the nature and context of the employer demand. Boy, would I like to know that. I want to know the nature and context of the employer demand. That makes me interested. I know this is what's on their website, but nonetheless, if they can deliver on that promise, I'm very interested. What do you do next? You find a friend. You find somebody who has access to Burning Glass Analytics. They're usually going to be within either your IR department. I'm sorry for the double use of the word research there. Institutional research. Research isn't exactly what I meant to say. But in terms of your institutional research department, or you can find them, like I did, within workforce development. And there's our building here in Phoenix at the Maricopa Community Colleges. So you've got to find your person who's got access. Because if you're to start just on your own, there's a bit of a learning curve here. Better work with someone who does it routinely. So I sat down with John. John is a longtime colleague. He does our Burning Glass stuff. I said to John, I want intelligence on the nature and context of the employer demand. Isn't that funny? I got that from the Burning Glass website, so I thought I would try that on John. What did John say? He said, Mike, let's get started. So that was a good answer. John said, Mike, what industry? And I thought to myself, he probably means what the NAICS number is. Well, I wasn't sure about that, but he told me that's what he wanted. The North American Industry Classification System, many of you know it. It's a federal standard that classifies industries. This isn't a tutorial on NAICS today, but that's a good starting point. That's what you've got to know. John knew this stuff. He knew how. I said, John, I want to do advanced manufacturing, and so we figured out a couple of NAICS codes. Good. His next question, he said, Mike, what occupations? Well, what he really wanted to know was what was the SOC code, the SOC code. That's the standard occupational classification system. Again, that's a federal system that classifies workers. People have told me that SOC codes are not necessarily the best thing in the world. They don't always define an occupation. That be as it may be, but the SOC codes are important. So you've got to work through some of the challenges there. And I wanted to show John how much I knew. I said, John, maybe we should use ONET. He sort of looked at me with an eyebrow raised, like, Mike, do you know what you're talking about here? Well, ONET is this occupational information system, occupational information network, and there's a link to it. And John didn't know, but I actually knew something about ONET, so I couldn't resist telling him, hey, John, I actually helped write this ONET 519141.00 semiconductor processor description years ago. I was contacted by the Department of Labor, and I helped them write it. So I knew a little bit about it. He knew a lot more than me, so I couldn't resist showing off for him. He said, Mike, that's great, but why don't we just log in? So we pulled up his computer, went to Burning Glass Labor Insight. I guess there's a bunch of things at Burning Glass, but this is where you go. And this is what Burning Glass says. Look at the italics, folks, down at the bottom. We mine and code detailed data from each job posting, describing the specific skills, education, experience, and work activities. And Burning Glass says, hey, this goes well beyond the occupation and industry codes offered in other sources. I think they may be right there. Okay, I'm liking it. I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. So John says, look, Mike, we got to make some decisions here. Let's go into the Create Report tabs. Now, folks, I'm not doing this as a tutorial on Burning Glass today. I'm just giving you a sort of upper level view of what we're seeing here. So I made some selections. These arrows said, you can choose the skills. You can choose how it's shown. John says, what time period do you want to use, Mike? I said, well, what are my options? He said, we could do last week. We could do 3 months, 6 months. I said, give me the last year. That sounds fine. And then we went on to the right-hand side, and we fiddled, and we added filters, and we did some ONET stuff. Turns out Burning Glass, you can see in the middle on the right there, they sort of did some pre-filtering of categories, pretty useful. So we fiddled around, we clicked this and that, and then we applied it, and then we ran the skills report. And this is what John showed me for advanced manufacturing. So what you see here on the left-hand side is the skills, starting with CNC, computer numerical control, machining, inspection, lathes, and so on down. You can see going down the calipers, lean manufacturing towards the bottom. And then there was a count of things in the bar chart. I clipped the right-hand side. Those 3 bars are actually equal on this particular one. So I was sort of fascinated. I wasn't quite sure what to make of this at this point, but I was somewhat fascinated. So I said, John, we're going to have to look at this further. But first, folks, let's pause for a moment here. This is Mr. Thoughtful. I call this guy here Mr. Thoughtful. I'd like to know if at this point we might have any questions from the audience. Now I've got one here. It says, how can I get a trial of Burning Glass? Can I get a trial of Burning Glass? I'm not sure they offer trial things. I actually don't know. You could obviously talk to them on the website. That would be fine. I don't know the answer if you can do that. I think the best thing to do is find somebody that's got Burning Glass. They pretty much like to talk about it, so that's not a bad idea. Here's a second question. What about duplicates? Like if a job posting appears on multiple job boards, does that inflate the answer? That's the question. I think that might have been true at one time, but now these folks like Burning Glass have put in deduplicators. I'm pretty sure what that means. So that's really what they've done. They pretty well cleaned up that, although I think if you ask the same question of different analytical systems, you will, even today, get different answers. There's a lot to do with how it all works. So I thought I would just point that out. So thank you for that question. Another question that came in from the chat, do we know a free system to do this? I don't know myself. Maybe if other of you out there, other participants might be aware, if there's anything free, go ahead and put it in the question window and I'll reproduce that. So I don't know if there's a free system. I don't think so, but I'm not sure of that question. Here's one more. This is funny. Does it look on Craigslist? Well, yes. In fact, all job boards where things are posted seem to be pretty well covered by these systems. So they are going to, they're going to look across the spectrum here, including, of all things, Craigslist, and hopefully they're going to dedupe all of this as well. So good. I just wanted to pause there, get people thinking. I know we're fairly recent into this, so go ahead and use that question and answer pane on the lower right of your screen. Let's get ready now, because before we go into the next section, I want to ask you a question via the poll. Christina, let's pull up poll number 3. There it is, folks. It's right on the right-hand side. I'm curious, have you used data mine approaches like this before, like the Burning Glass stuff? Now, maybe not yourself, or maybe you've worked with somebody. Have you? Yes, to determine the number of jobs forecast. Remember, I'm asking a very specific question here. Have you used this to determine the job forecast, not the skills, that's coming next, but I want to know if you've used this to determine the number of jobs. So the questions are yes, to determine the number of jobs, or no, not yet. So please go ahead and click in your answers, and then Christina will give them just another moment. They probably know this answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead and close that poll, Christina, and then let's see if we can take a look at the results. So get ready for the next question, folks, while Christina is doing this, because the next one I'm going to ask you about the skills. Okay, we're just pausing for just a second till we take a look at the results. And there they are. So I'm pleased. Just slightly under half have used this. So you have some familiarity with the system. Go ahead and close that, Christina. Excellent. So a bunch of us, the majority in fact, haven't used it for jobs. Okay, let's go to poll number 4. Christina, I'm going to click forward to number 4. I've used data mining approaches like this to determine skill need, yes or no. So think about that. Let's see if that ratio changes that we saw just a moment ago. Yes to determine skill need, no, not yet. Okay, thinking. It's not hard to put in your answer. Click those buttons. Christina, here's the countdown, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go ahead and close that poll, and we'll pull up the results. So let's hold on just a second. To me, this idea of using it for skills is relatively new to me, maybe not to everybody, certainly. Okay. And there's the results. So that's interesting. See, everybody's sort of like me. Doesn't it make me feel better? No, not yet. Oh, man, I'm happy. I'm happy that you came to this webinar. Go ahead and close the poll, Christina, because we can talk about these things and try to see what's really here. I'm going to click forward now. Back to the story after that lovely polling guy. You know, in spite of John, my good colleague, showing me these things and telling me about this, I really wasn't sure what this was telling me yet, what the sort of detail was there. I wasn't sure. So what did I do? I got on the phone. So there's me holding my phone. I called Dan Mastuccia. He's Chief Analytics Officer at Burning Glass. I thought, wow, I should call the Chief Analytics Officer. That sounded like a good idea. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but he was happy to talk to me, so we talked. Dan said, you know, when we use Burning Glass, what we're trying to do here is sort of unique. We're trying to predict and understand the future from looking at the recent past. And I'm thinking, that's an interesting perspective. That's what these analytics people do. They look at the recent past and try to predict what's going forward. Dan said, if we can make skill projections by looking at individual skills today and skill growth, we can gain insight. And Dan said, I mean insight into how this thing is evolving. He says, I can give you a snapshot today. He says, but what I think is really interesting is if we can see how this is going to evolve with time. I said, Dan, I like it. I like this idea. Wait a minute. Yes. So here we are. We talked. You know what? We care. Educators care about what are the most common skills. Well, that makes sense, right? Because educators build their programs around those common skills. But Dan said, you know, they care about, industry cares about what are the most distinctive skills, because that helps them push what they're trying to do. So when they're writing their job descriptions, they're often looking for distinctive skills. I said, Dan, tell me more. He said, Mike, certain firms or clusters or hubs of industry are probably going to be the leaders. He says, for example, you know, in the IT world, you could say, well, Google or Microsoft are leaders. They're probably identifying skills for them today, and it's probably going to trickle down into other companies pretty soon in the future. He said, give me a name of somebody in the Phoenix area that you think is a leader in advanced manufacturing. I said, well, Boeing has a manufacturing thing here, a helicopter place. He said, see, that's what we're talking about. Boeing is really a leader in advanced manufacturing technology. What they're doing today is likely to trickle down into other aerospace firms. He says, so you can gain some insight by looking at specifically focusing on leaders or groups of leaders. He was starting to get my attention here because I hadn't thought about this before. He was really starting to get my attention. And then Dan said, look at Tesla. He says, if you look at their job descriptions, it's like a tech firm. They're looking for software skills. It's like looking at a technology company. He says, you turn to Ford. He says, I don't have anything against Ford. I like Ford. But they look more like a conventional manufacturer. He says, it's amazing what you can get as a sense of industry by looking at their postings. And you can actually look at each one of the postings that these places find. So suddenly I had, in the middle of this telephone call, I'm sitting up straighter because I just couldn't believe it. I had this idea. I had this great idea right in the middle of this call. So here's the backstory. In Arizona, there's a car company called Lucid, an electric car, and they've announced plans, their plans so far to open a big manufacturing plant south of town here in maybe 50 miles from here. Electric car company. And I thought, oh man, I can go to Tesla because I know they have a manufacturing battery place up in the Reno area. I could look at their job postings and try to get a sense of what they're looking for, because that's got to translate to other electric car companies, Tesla being the leader in that area. And Dan said to me, he says, Mike, that's called stealing from the playbook. Your idea is a good one. You just look at what other people do and then where they're going, and you can get a lot of hints. That's going to help you tighten up your programs there at the colleges in Arizona to try to respond to this. I was excited. I was thinking, oh man, I really had an idea of my own here. He said, yeah, of course that's what you do. All right, so Dan, what report should I run? He said, well, I think you really can learn a lot by looking, he says, somewhat surprisingly, at the software skills and the baseline skills. Those are names of reports. He says, you can learn a lot there. He said, now here's an interesting one, Mike, I think you might use like in your electric car company. There's a keyword function where you can type in like a keyword. Let's suppose you use battery. Well, that could really winnow down your search into very specific things that might be important to you in who knows what way, but might be important. I thought, that's pretty good. I said, Dan, what about certifications? We have folks who work, I'm just going to use the Department of Labor grants as an example. And certifications are important because it helps them identify qualifications. He said, Mike, to tell you the truth, there are very few explicit requests in job postings for certifications. He says, there's an exception. Welding often has that. They're looking for a welder certified in a very relatively narrow area. That'll often be there. He says, but in general, I'm talking about less than 10% will mention explicit requests for certifications. So I had a little sigh there. My shoulders sunk a little bit because I was hoping to find out more about the demand for certifications. But I'm just not going to find it here, Dan said. He was just being honest about what they're seeing in the data. Okay, I'm happy. I'm really learning stuff. Here's Dan's really sort of final bit of advice here. He said, Mike, don't worry so much about the numbers on a chart like this. He said they're, to be honest, a little less meaningful than the relative numbers. What you're seeing here is when someone's looking for a machinist in the advanced manufacturing area in your locale in the last 12 months, they're really focused on CNC and machining in general. So he said that's not surprising. So I'm looking at myself. I said, okay, this is looking good. And I'm scanning my eyes. Why don't you follow my eye down to number 3 on the list there, where it says inspection. Inspection. I know our advanced manufacturing programs here pretty well. I know them. And I'm thinking, How many times have we talk about inspection in our courses? Not all that much, I'm thinking to myself. This is number 3, and I'm thinking, we hardly even talk about this. So, boy, did this get my mind is spinning at this point. Well, it was fun talking to Dan. So I started thinking, how do I use this information with my industry advisory board? Now, we call those BILTs, Business and Industry Leadership Teams, and many of you know Ann Beheeler, I think she's on the line with us today, who's at the CTC Center at Colleton College. They sort of created the BILT model, and we and others have followed it. It's been very effective for us. But I'm thinking, when I meet with the BILT again, this is going to change the equation. So I used a bigger font there for change the equation because I wanted to make a big point. People are thinking to themselves, Mike is changing the equation. Who does he think he is? No, I'm just joking. Here's my thinking. Employers can react to the data. Instead of us telling them about their programs, they can react to some data. They think like that. They like to react to data. And Mike, I thought to myself, job postings are their way of telling us what they want. Well, this is probably obvious to a lot of you, but for me, these little bells are going off. Now I know what to do at my next BILT meeting. I'm going to do this. So here it is, the Business and Industry Leadership Team. We made one of the smarter decisions we made. Instead of having, these are what we would call industry advisory boards. Instead of having them chaired by an educator, we had the chair from industry. And so our chair is from Modern Industries, and here's their logo. So I'm thinking before my meeting, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go onto Burning Glass and find out about Modern Industries, what there was looking for. So now I'm going to sit down with Mark Lashinsky. He's the chair. And I'm going to say, Mark, we ran the data. Those are beautiful words to an industry person's ear. They're thinking, this is somebody I could actually talk to. And then I'm going to say, Mark, our analysis of your jobs postings shows the following. Mark is sitting up straighter in his chair at this point because he likes this. I said, Mark, I pulled over the last 12 months 6 postings that Modern had under advanced manufacturing. These are the skills that Modern Industries is looking for. He's looking at the data. By the way, folks, look at number 2, inspection. Remember how I was talking about inspection? And I was sort of surprised because Mark is looking for lean manufacturing. We talk about lean in our classes. That's an important thing. And of course, there's CNC and other stuff like that there. But I'm struck because lean's number 1, but inspection is number 2. I show this to Mark. Mark, could this possibly be right? Inspection is the second highest skill. You know what he said? He literally said this. Mike, yep, inspection in general is a high demand skill. Holy cow, my world changed right in that moment. I had shown an industry partner his information, told him our analysis, and he agreed. So now I'm thinking, I got to talk to the faculty in our programs. We got to talk about inspection and see how we can ramp this up a little bit more. Or maybe it's there and I don't know it. But boy, did this give me some information to do this. So I'm telling you this story not because it's a great, well, it is sort of a great story, but hopefully you can use information like this one. So thank you, Mark. You know, this has been a pretty local discussion so far, right? I'm focused right on my locale and, in fact, an individual industry member. But, of course, you can look more broadly. Let's get on a plane. Let's travel to California and look at a bigger picture. You can drive if you want to. You don't have to fly. So my colleague, John Carice, at I guess he's City College of San Francisco, but his main thing is the Centers for Excellence in California. He and his colleagues published this in 2014. John told me they're just about ready to release a new report, so we have to keep our eyes open for that. So let's look more broadly now. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I want to give you the big overview here. Here's their title, Supply and Demand. Keep that in mind, supply and demand. Analysis, that's a good word. Life sciences, biotech. Okay, middle skills workforce, that means, something less than a 4-year degree. So you can see the frame of what they're doing. What did John and his colleagues do? Well, let's look at their process. Remember, we're now at a much larger scale. Wouldn't surprise you, he's doing some of the same things, right? Defining the industry sectors where they started. So he used them NAICS codes, and they said let's limit it to 5 industry subsectors. Now, to be honest, John has a team there. It wasn't just John, right? So there's a lot of data, a lot of stuff to be done here. So don't underestimate the challenge of doing this on a larger scale. Okay, they got their 5 sectors. Next, what are the occupations? Well, he told me, look, these SOC codes, they can be challenging. He says they don't always represent what's out there. He says, I'm sorry, Mike, they just don't. But they did the best they could. They chose 2 groups. They said, let's do this, 6 groups here, 14 groups there, so at least we can know what we're talking about. We'll be able to analyze our results in these 2 areas. Now they said, okay, we've got this defined. Let's go ahead and analyze the industry demand. That was their next step. So what they did is they used EMSI for projected job demand. And sure enough, they used burning glass for the top employers, the top skills, the educational requirements, and the job titles. So they did this analysis. They turned the crank. They got out their burning glass and EMSI analytics. What really this did was help them understand the employers, who they were dealing with, the employers, because they could identify who the employers were if they didn't know them. So they got the demand. What did they do next? Well, they thought about, okay, remember the title of this report is supposed to be demand and supply. So they said, what's the supply side? Now, all of us online, we're a bit more comfortable with the supply side because that's us. We go to our college, usually our institutional research or whatever it's called within our colleges or our district, and they say, well, what's the number of completers in this program? What's our retention? How many graduates do we have? We know those things, right? We can get those things. It takes a little doing, but that's our supply side. So then, now they've got those things. They've got the demand side, the supply side. Now they turned to that skill data and started looking more closely at the skills. This whole report wasn't focused on skills. It was just part of it. So I pulled this table from their report. You can look for yourself. I just did a screenshot, so it's not perfect. Top required skills for job postings in California. So they looked at 2,800 and so data. I was very pleased to see this because on the left here, the top technical skill for these biotech people was chemistry. Now, people who might know me know that I claim chemistry is the most fundamental skill. Doesn't mean just because I was trained as a chemist, but I always say that. So I was really excited to see how important chemistry was. Oh my God, look at what number 2 is. It's inspection. What's happening here? But it wouldn't surprise you to know that things like GMP, good manufacturing practices, and other stuff are important there as well. I'm not going into this report today. I'm just giving you a sense of the skills that they're seeing. Notice they chose a tabular format instead of the bar chart format for their presentation here. That's good. Here's one of their findings. And boy, this finding wouldn't surprise you at all, would it? The community colleges in California provide important training for these jobs. Okay, good. But they might need to expand their capacity and align their programs to meet employer demands. What they really mean by this is when they looked at the employer demand and the number of students coming out of their programs, there was a mismatch. So that gave them some impetus for some of the colleges in the system to create new biotech programs. You got to be careful with this. You just can't create a program at a whim today, right? You have to understand the demand very carefully. So that was good. I thought it was a great finding for them. So it's fun. It's a good report. I'd like to encourage you to take a look at it. So we're coming towards the end of my story. It's a little bit shorter webinar today. You're tired of hearing my story, I know, but let me tell you what you learned today and what you can now do. Number 1, you can see the rationale for doing this, right? I know you're convinced that using this data mining approach can really tell you something. I bet you there's limitations too, but I bet you there are things that we can know. And I hope that you can find somebody. If you don't want to get out your checkbook and buy burning glass analytics for your own little computer, find somebody who wants to do this. I was talking with a colleague, and he was telling me that these sort of analytics are sometimes held within the economic development arms of the local governments. They'll also subscribe to them. I bet you can find a subscriber to let you in. And now say to them, I want to look at the demand side. The demand side. That's what you're going to say. Here's more summary. You know what? Those of us who are writing proposals, and boy, upcoming in the fall, there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's NSF proposals for October. There's ASIL, Informal Science Learning, coming up, and all kinds of things, ATE coming up in the fall. So many of us are already working on proposals. I bet that when you get to that need and rationale story, when you're talking about aligning programs, that's a common thing. You can use this stuff. Number two, this sounds funny to say it like this, you can now talk to industry. Well, you're thinking, wait a minute, Mike, I could always talk to industry before. What do you mean now I can talk to them? What I mean is now you could use a certain language that has to do with data, in some cases their own data, to talk to them. And I know for our business and industry leadership team meetings, this is going to help tighten that relationship. Third bullet, you think about what they did in California. You could see how this could be applied more grandly. Maybe you've got a big consortium, maybe you've got a statewide thing, I don't know. But the cool thing about these filters is you can put in a town, or you can put in a county or a state or the nation if you want to. So you can get data at various levels of granularity. And the fourth bullet, I know everyone is very happy that they attended today, so that's one of the summaries for this. We're going to spend a little time now with some questions, and then I've got a few closing announcements for today's webinar. So go ahead and fling those questions into the question and answer window. Oh, here's one. Can you exclude words from a search? You know, that's an interesting question. I'll have to tell you my own experience with that. Probably shows some of the limits of the system. So I'm searching under advanced manufacturing, right, under job titles. And one of the groups that comes up, and it's not a small number, is bakers. I'm thinking, well, I suppose in a way you could think of that as advanced manufacturing, but I like bakers. I mean, I like to bake. I like bakers, but I don't want them to necessarily be part of our data set. So it turns out you can exclude keywords. I could go in there and say exclude bakers or baking or whatever it was. So yes, you can actually exclude that from the system. Here's another question that talks about currency of the data. How current is the data? Well, you know, I wondered about that too. And in fact, the data is real time. Now, what does that mean? A week? I don't know. But it's pretty close to real time. I mean, remember, they're using spiders, right? Burning Glass has a spider, and it's out there crawling websites. It's crawling job postings and sending back information. I'm not a coder. I don't know how spiders work, but I know it's pretty darn close to real time, maybe, 24 hours, that sort of thing, as sites update. But they're out there crawling around. I hope that doesn't freak you out. But they're crawling around looking for this sort of information. Here's the final question that we will have time for today. How far can you narrow this down? Like advanced manufacturing is a very big field. Well, it's a good question because as you delve into this, you have to spend some time with these codes, those SOC codes and ONETs and stuff like that. It's not a perfect world. And I would say this, whatever you're doing, whatever report you're running, make sure you understand the filters you use to get that report. That'll allow you to reproduce it in the future. It'll allow you to show your results to people and have them, here's the parameters under which I ran this, right? That's the idea that we're we're doing here. So I'm hopefully that's the key thing that you're going to take away today. Let me click forward to the next slide, and if you do have a last-minute question, go ahead and throw it in while I'm making these final announcements. This is the most wonderful webinar series, I have to tell you the truth, because it really talks about things that are important to technical educators, technical development personnel at community colleges, and other places. The next one is coming up just next month, September 21, preparing, excuse me just a second, folks. I'm sorry that the system clicked over. We'll get right back to it. There we are. Preparing for the future, the ins and outs of succession planning. Well, what is succession planning? I mean, industry uses it all the time, and educators are supposed to do it. We've got two expert presenters, Marilyn Barger, she's the PI at FLATE in Florida, and Phil Santosi, I know Phil, he's the Director of Client Engagement at Florida Makes. They really live succession planning, and they'll tell you about their experience, some ways of measuring it, some ways of monitoring it. I think that's important for you to realize and to be part of. And by the way, we're always involved, and CCTA works at national conferences as well, including this summer's high-tech conference. It was in Salt Lake City, but next year, put it on your calendar, July 23 through 26, 2018, in Miami, Florida. And there may be sessions there. We're still in the shaping and planning things for where we'll engage the CCTA community. And as we get to the end of our webinar, as you exit the Cisco WebEx system, a new window pop-ups and it says, I got some questions for you. There's only 4 questions, so I hope that you'll take just a moment to respond to that survey as you close out today. I'd like to thank you for listening to my story. It sure was a lot of fun telling you this story. I learned a lot by talking with all of my colleagues getting ready for this webinar. So thank you doing this CCTA forever. I always say that at the end of these series. Thanks for joining today. Look forward to us. Go onto the website, take a look at their upcoming webinars. And that officially ends our webinar for today. Thank you.